to look up the greatest comedy shows of all time, you'll find Seinfeld, The Office, Parks and Recreation, Friends, 30 Rock, The Simpsons, Brooklyn Nine-Nine, How I Met Your Mother, South Park, Cheers. But for me, the best is Arrested Development. So Arrested Development was the brainchild of writer-producer Mitchell Hurwitz in 2003. After working on shows like Nurses, The Golden Girls, and Ellen, he was selected by Ron Howard to create a new sitcom for the Fox network, which he created based loosely on his own family experience from when he was growing up in California. The show was created to have a feel of a reality TV show, with its handheld cameras following a dysfunctional B-grade celebrity family. However, the series had revolutionary writing, with each story intricately crossing over with the others in each episode, with jokes sometimes spanning across seasons for its ultimate punchline, the most famous one of course being Buster's hand, and the show subtly including small elements across episodes to have greater ultimate payoffs in the long run. And the show was brilliant, with the narratives neatly summed up with Ron Howard's narration as well as one of the greatest ensemble casts in television history. Arrested Development was a smash hit with those who watched it. Now, it has been said plenty of times before that this show is well ahead of its time, as its multi-episode story threads and subtle continuations do lend itself far better to a streaming service binge watch rather than the traditional weekly viewing. So while the show may have done extremely well with the awards viewers who would view episodes in quick succession compared to those who would view it on a week-to-week basis, as unlike other shows such as Friends and Seinfeld, Arrested Development is not a show where you can easily pull out a random episode, as each episode often requires the context and story threads of previous episodes. For example, take The Office. While there were often overrunning romances and larger plots surrounding the company, most of the episodes are self-contained. Introduce a main plot involving Michael with either Jim, Pam, or Dwight at his side, while there would be a B story with one of the two aforementioned characters, where there would be minor interactions with some of the show's secondary characters, but would always end up coming together at the end, wrapping up the new conflicts. Whereas Arrested Development always felt like each new episode was a new jigsaw puzzle piece getting added, piecing together a larger story, all leading towards a big final payoff. And as genius as that was, this made it hard to pick up new viewers, and thus through its entire runtime, even while getting showered with awards, always had low ratings, having episodes cut from each season before being unceremoniously rushed to its ending after just its third season in 2006. But let's actually talk about the show real quick and why I love it so much. So Arrested Development on the surface may just look like another Fox show about a dysfunctional family. However, as previously mentioned, the writing is genius. The style of the show is extremely entertaining with its constant clever cutaway gags. The music is clever and ties with the themes, and all of the characters are fantastic, and their interactions are really the heart of what made the show so great. The characters. Just keep that in mind. Not to mention two of my favourite comedy characters of all time with Job and Lucille, as well as Tobias, George, Buster, Lindsay, George Michael, maybe, and quite possibly my favourite everyman in comedy, Michael, as the absolute perfect introductory character into this crazy scenario. The show was clever, subversive, and really helped revolutionize comedy writing. So after its cancellation in 2006, the show quickly became popular through DVD sales and streaming, where viewers were able to watch episodes in succession, or as we know it now as binge watching. And in 2011, the show was renewed for a fourth season on Netflix. And that's when Arrested Development died. No, I'm not going to be that dramatic, but right from the get-go there was something off about season 4. We opened with Kristen Wiig and Seth Rogen before seeing a Mexican celebration, and then Michael. However, it was just Michael. So by this time in the cast's career, people had moved on to far greater things. Jeffrey Tambor was about to start Transparent, Jason Bateman had reclaimed his movie stardom, Michael Cera had starred in some of the best comedy movies of the time, David Cross was a successful stand-up, Tony Hale was now a regular on Veep, and Will Arnett was just about in every comedy you could think of. And this led to scheduling conflicts amongst the cast. So instead, Arrested Development went for a structure that would have episodes centered on each individual character. For example, you'd start with Michael and then move to Joe before getting Lucille, then George Sr., then George Michael, then maybe, as all characters started in the same spot, then all separated before coming back at the end. It was definitely an ambitious tactic to take the show, however, the show had now become 100% driven by the story. In its original run, Arrested Development would usually have its main plot driven by Michael, who would also have a direct impact on the B plot, which would be centered around either George Michael, Job, or Buster, or Lucille, which would then come back to have unintended consequences on Michael by the end of the episode. However, now they'd stretched this formula through a whole season of the Domino or Rube Goldberg effect of comedy writing. However, while the payoffs might have been fine and all clicked, the journey getting there was hardly ever, well, funny. Arrested Development used the characters' interactions like a magician, as a distraction from the real story, focusing on Godzilla impressions and chicken dances, as the stories were often quite business-centric. But now, with no character interactions, we were forced to endure a large number of simply forgettable and unfunny side characters that all felt like shallow replacements for the main cast. Marky, Debris, Herbert Love, P-Hound, Rebel, Argyle, Oscar's friends, god, even Rod Howard felt like a step too far. This was now very much the Hollywood celebrity parade I talked about in my Sins of Sequels video, which is strange considering
Nicole Kidman.
I don't want to just round up a bunch of famous people that have nothing to do with our family as some sort of cheap stunt. I mean, what's that got to do with us?
the Lucille story was just a lot of exposition about the Wall plot before the whole trial went amiss. Lindsay's story with Marky was tough to sit through, but the worst victim of this style was Michael. So of course Michael was always the straight man, however with the only person to play off being an older George Michael, the goofy comic traits that he had reacted to in the original seasons had bounced back onto him, and it was simply hard to watch. Michael was no longer in charge. It seemed like a depressed single dad who missed the glory days. And things felt off right from the get-go. This just simply wasn't the same show. This isn't to say there weren't highlights of the season. Bits like Tobias and his unfortunate incident on To Catch a Predator, or the entirety of Job's first episode where his feral Jesus illusion had me in hysterics. However, ultimately for Arrested Development to work, the journey must be as good as the destination, and in this case, it simply wasn't. It was almost a slog at times. So then, 5 years later, Arrested Development returned for a 5th season that promised to return to the classic style of the show, and well, it did. Kind of. Except it wasn't funny. While it had returned to the style of more based on character interactions, the scheduling conflicts were still obvious, with the characters being together for mostly no more than one scene at a time. Arrested Development often required at least 3 or 4 characters in a scene at a time, due to how fun and different all of them were, and the side characters was never given more than 2 episodes in the limelight, except for Charlize Theron. But now characters like Debris again, Murphy Brown, Rebel, Derbil McDillett, Toddler, and Joni, and while some of them may have served a purpose like Murphy Brown creating Fake Block, the journey getting there was once again extremely underwhelming. The story had once again become an over-explained development plan between the Wall, Fake Block, the Chinese, the gay mafia, and the Mexican Romneys, which may sound fun in concept, but was simply not. The final 4 episodes were when the show started to come together, and it was when all of the characters were reunited in the building. Job was doing tricks with Buster, George Michael and maybe had their own story going on, and Michael was with his parents, and everyone had finally come together, and the show was finally starting to click. And while those last 4 episodes definitely picked up in quality, it never quite reached the levels of the original show, and we were left with a cliffhanger for a 6th season. So after all this, I think the problem with Arrested Development's last 2 seasons is quite clear. The show can only be at its best when it is the characters interacting with one another, being able to freely play off each other. And while the story is a great element of the show, it's not the heart of what Arrested Development is. I am reminded of a quote Dan Harmon said about ever returning to make a community movie.
If I pull out a typewriter right now and write a community movie just from my own heart and mind, then I have to go through the heartbreak and agony of finding out which of the people are going to show up to make it, you know. And whereas if I, on the other hand, if I wait for everybody to line up and say we're all out of work and ready to do a community movie, well, I guess that's a bad idea too.
And while that is definitely a good point, with Arrested Development, it kind of requires that both of these quotas be filled, as these characters are not designed to carry large chunks of the story by themselves. So unfortunately, unless the whole cast is able to be there for as long as they would desire for them to be there, maybe the show shouldn't continue into a 6th season. So thanks so much for watching, guys. This was a different kind of video for me to make, however I feel it is necessary as a loyal viewer of this show, that unless they can truly achieve its full potential, they really shouldn't try to force new seasons upon us, as I said before, I love this show, and will always remain loyal to it, however it is definitely in a rough spot at the moment. So please make sure you like, share and subscribe to The Young Cynics. This Sunday we will have a bracket tournament for the greatest Quentin Tarantino movie.